Hey everyone, it's Rick, and thanks for joining me on another Inwyt Walkabout. I'm on one of the interdevelopment trails that run between different housing areas in our neighborhood. Show you a view here of a trail I've been on before, but you wouldn't think that there are houses to the left and the right. It's nice that they've actually created these trails. It's a hot day today. Summer feels like it's in full swing. The flies are out, so you'll probably see me swatting things out of my vision periodically. So it feels like summer has arrived. I wanted to continue our conversation that we've been having over the past couple of walkabouts related to shared understanding, the role that fragmentation plays. And, we have spent a lot of time looking at the interplay between what we think is and what we think should be, and how that really precludes us from seeing what actually is. And that the real challenge for problem solving anywhere is really an awareness of that. And what I wanted to share with you this time was some of the challenges that I think everyone who's in the problem solving domain faces, which is the challenge of moving from conversations where people are interested in either personal development or leadership training or problem solving training and seek out alternative approaches and views, ways of doing things, to what actually goes on in the field when you're at work or in any personal environment where that conversation isn't sought after, and where there really isn't necessarily an opportunity to bring it up because it's not the right time. And I've had a couple of examples in the prior weeks where I've met with different leaders who have seen results that we accomplish, that we achieve with our approach, our precision problem solving approach, both in the work space, but also through publication, presentations, things like that. And where they approach me and are curious as to what exactly we do, how it works, and whether there are opportunities to apply what we do in their context of interest. So a lot of work that we do, I'm in healthcare, as you know, focuses on care redesign and really trying to deliver exceptional care for all the stakeholders, patients, families, care teams, the hospital, and so forth. And that really is our focus. And, as a result of that approach and all the things that we've been talking about, the way we apply them, we get significant results in many ways without even talking about those areas that we're discussing on these walkabouts. And so it's interesting when you have leaders who are struggling and challenged with big problems in healthcare, financially and otherwise, how the pressure and the focus really always centers around quick fixes and, in a lot of ways, cost reduction. And so the mindset coming into a conversation, when I'm approached saying, how do you do things, is almost a misalignment, because the focus, the pressure from the boards, from just the industry in general, is always in many ways about creating efficiencies, but primarily looking at it through cost reduction, because that's the clearly visible and measurable area where you can quantify some sort of change that is made. And generally speaking, if you're not too thoughtful about it, it's not very, very difficult to cut costs and get a quick result, a quick metric improvement that then has, as we know, a lot of implications and deteriorated care risk, or service risk or business risk going forward when it's not carefully thought through. And so you end up having these conversations where I will be, for example, talking about the importance of looking at the big picture, of saying, it's about really saying, how do we optimize care delivery, or the systems that we're really interested in creating improvements around, and reinforcing that cost reduction is a part of that, but is not the primary focus, and it's not the entry point. And what is always interesting is that very rarely is there an aha part of the leaders that I engage with in that regard, particularly as one goes up and gets more distant from the front lines of care. And they're doing their best with all the pressures, so it's not a critique as much as it is just an observation that our whole approach to problem solving is really in many ways in the wrong direction, and we don't see that. And so all of the things that we're talking about here on these walkabouts are elements that, for the majority of healthcare leaders and probably people in general, either are not of interest, and for which there's just, quote, no time to have that conversation. And so it is much more of a challenge than to try to introduce a new approach in an introductory way, and through a conversation, and really try to get a foothold, if you will, in trying to do something new. So, again, what's the point of this? I think it's very clear to me that if one takes the time to look, and as we said, not focus just on the outside problems, but really start to look at how we shape our problem-solving approach from ourselves, that you can get to a new awareness. And the real challenge then is to ask the question as to how one can introduce a frame shift, if you will, in an environment that really isn't ready for it or receptive to it because of all the other competing obligations and pressures. So, it kind of, again, comes back to, a little bit of a disheartening observation that, for all the opportunity that's there, it's, again, not really the challenge of the functional problem as the first place to look, as much as it is trying to get that entry point into looking at our own barriers to problem solving. And for which, when you start to say, well, we've got all these methodologies that are out there, all these tools, all these experts who can use the tools well, really at the core level, one of probably the fundamental challenge is, or the fundamental competition, if you will, to what we do, is just the status quo approach to problem solving. Is, again, sort of this notion that we have an understanding of what the problems are, we have a solution-oriented approach to solving this, many times of which is cost reduction, because that's sort of the quick, easy, and visible entry point. And to do, what a lot of times are termed as sprints, quick improvements. We don't have time to take things apart and to really get at a comprehensive understanding. We know what's going on, we have to fix it, and we have to fix it fast. And so it becomes, again, this area, this approach to firefighting, where the pressures that everybody's under dictate quick results, and for which the notion that taking some time up front to really understand what's going on is a waste of time, that we don't have that. And so it reminds me of, a phrase, a quote that one of my good colleagues has shared with me in the past, which is, our real mindset is no time to do it right, plenty of time to do it over. And when you look at the problems that particularly we face in healthcare, but really look at your personal lives, is the same things keep circling back over and over. And we're always trying to put that fire out, and then the next one, rather than taking a pause and saying, all right, look, all these things are creating a collective mess, a complicated, complex environment that never gets any simpler. And, our default is to try and just immediately put some solution in place that at least temporizes things. So, again, think about how this shows up in your daily lives, where you may have an interest yourself and be surrounded by people who really either don't understand, or it's not interesting. It's because it doesn't seem relevant relative to the pressures that are otherwise around them. And how one approaches change at the personal level, at the problem solving level, just the approach level, in a way that enables people to move in a direction perhaps that is new to them, without advertising or creating some kind of a threat that we're leaving the path of comfort. So we'll talk about that next time a little bit more, kind of take maybe a little deeper dive into what precision problem solving actually is and how we approach that, because it is effective. And then we'll see where we go from there. So that's it for today. Here's the path one more time for you all to take in. It's really quite nice to be in the shade. I hope you have a wonderful day, a great week, and I look forward to next time. This is Rick with Inwyt Walkabout. Take care.